The cantina on Omega Point Station was dark and quiet. Smoke filled the air from dozens of different alien species, each breathing different gases and chemicals. In the far corner, away from the crowds, sat a figure that most beings avoided. Commander Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire hunched over his drink, his four massive arms wrapped around the glass like he was protecting it from enemies. His gray skin showed deep scars from old battles. 3 eyes stared into the blue liquid, remembering things he wished he could forget. The other patrons whispered about him when they thought he could not hear. They called him the ghost of the human wars. Some said he was crazy. Others said he was the only Vorthak who truly understood what humans were capable of. Young Velthon approached the table slowly. He was fresh from the military academy, his uniform still crisp and clean. His scales were bright green, showing his youth and inexperience. The older Vorthak scales had turned dull gray long ago. "Commander Zethkar?" Velthon asked in a quiet voice. "May I sit with you, sir?" The old warrior looked up with tired eyes. For a moment, Velthon thought he might be sent away. Then Zethkar gestured to the empty chair across from him. "You are Velthon, son of General Vorthak." Zethkar said. "It was not a question. I knew your father. He died well in the Second Battle of Kepler." Velthon nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. "Yes, sir. He spoke of you often. He said you were the bravest warrior he had ever known." Zethkar made a sound that might have been laughter, but there was no joy in it. "Brave? No, young one. I am not brave. I am simply too afraid to die." The young Vorthak did not understand, but he waited. He had come here for a reason. Every military academy student had heard whispers about the human wars. The official records were sealed. The few survivors never spoke about what happened, but Velthon needed to know. His assignment orders had just come through. He was being sent to the frontier close to human space. "You want to know about the humans," Zethkar said, reading the young soldier's thoughts. "They all do eventually, the ones who are smart enough to be afraid." Velthon leaned forward. "The academy instructors will not speak of it. They say the war is over and we must focus on the future, but I have heard stories, terrible stories." Zethkar drained his glass and signaled for another. The bartender, a 6-armed creature from the Spiral Nebula, brought the drink quickly and left without a word. Everyone knew better than to linger near the old commander when he was remembering. "Stories," Zethkar repeated. "Yes, there are always stories. Most of them are wrong. The truth is much worse than any story you have heard." The cantina grew quieter around them. Other patrons seemed to sense that something important was happening. Some moved to tables farther away. Others leaned in, hoping to catch pieces of what was being said. "I was there from the beginning," Zethkar continued. "I was a captain then, young and stupid like you. We thought we knew everything about war. The Vorthak Empire had conquered 47 worlds. We had crushed the Zelathi Federation in 6 months. The crystal mines of Andromeda surrendered after we destroyed just 3 of their cities. We were the strongest military force in the galaxy." Velthon had studied these victories in school. The Vorthak way of war was simple and effective. Overwhelming force, superior technology, and the complete destruction of enemy resistance. It had worked for 300 years. Then the scouts found Earth, Zethkar said, a small blue world in an unimportant system. The beings there had just invented faster-than-light travel. Their ships were crude and slow. Their weapons were basic energy cannons and primitive missiles. High Command decided they would be easy to conquer. The old warrior paused to drink. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the glass. Velthon noticed but said nothing. "The intelligence reports made us laugh," Zethkar continued. "The humans had never fought a space war. They had only small conflicts on their own planet. They had no allies, no advanced technology, no experience with alien species. Admiral Corthan said we would be home before the next moon cycle." Velthon had read about Admiral Corthan in the history books. He was listed as killed in action, but no details were given about how or when. "We assembled the first fleet," Zethkar said. 200 ships, including 12 dreadnoughts. It was enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. We jumped into their space expecting quick surrender. The humans had maybe 50 ships total, most of them converted cargo vessels. The old commander's three eyes focused on something far away. His voice became quieter, forcing Velthon to lean closer. We sent the standard surrender demand. Every species in the galaxy knew the Vorthak Empire's terms. Submit completely, accept slavery, and most of their population would be allowed to live. It was more generous than what we offered most worlds. What did the humans say? Velthon asked. Zethkar smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. They said no. The simple word hung in the air between them. In 3 centuries of expansion, only a handful of species had refused initial surrender demands. All of them had been extinct. Within a year. Just no? Velthon asked. Nothing else? Oh, there was more, Zethkar said. Their leader, a female named President Angela White, sent a message to Admiral Corthan. She said that humanity had fought for thousands of years to be free, and they would not stop now. She said that if we wanted their world, we would have to take it from their dead hands. Velthon had heard similar threats before. Most species made brave speeches before they realized the hopelessness of their situation. The Admiral was not concerned. Zethkar continued. We had heard such words many times. He ordered the fleet to advance. We would destroy their orbital defenses, then land troops on their major cities. Standard procedure. The old warrior stopped talking and stared into his drink again. The silence stretched on until Velthon began to worry that the story was over. But something went wrong. Velthon prompted. Wrong? Zethkar looked up sharply. Everything went wrong. Everything we knew about war, about strategy, about how civilized beings behave in battle. The humans threw it all away. The commander's voice grew stronger, filled with the passion of remembered terror. We expected them to position their fleet between us and their planet. Defensive formations trying to stop us from reaching their world. Instead, they came straight at us. No defensive positions, no careful tactics. They just attacked. Velthon frowned. That sounds like suicide. It was suicide, Zethkar agreed. But they did not care. Their ships were smaller and weaker than ours, but they fought like creatures possessed. When their weapons failed, they rammed our ships. When their engines were destroyed, they used emergency thrusters to crash into our hulls. The young Vorthak tried to imagine it. No rational military commander would order such attacks. The losses would be enormous for minimal gain. I watched a human destroyer called the Vengeance ram straight into the dreadnought Conquest of Stars, Zethkar said. Both ships were destroyed completely. The human captain, a female named Lisa Rodriguez, could have retreated. Her ship was damaged but still able to escape. Instead, she pointed her ship at our largest vessel and accelerated to maximum speed. Zethkar paused, lost in the memory. The explosion could be seen from 3 star systems away. Velthon stared at the old commander with wide eyes. The destruction of the Conquest of Stars was legendary. It had been the pride of the Vorthak fleet, a massive ship that had led the conquest of 12 worlds. To hear that a single human vessel had destroyed it seemed impossible. The explosion was just the beginning, Zethkar continued. Admiral Corthan expected the humans to retreat after losing their destroyer. Instead, more ships came at us. They did not care about formation or strategy. They just wanted to hurt us as much as possible before they died. The old warrior signaled for another drink. His hands were shaking more now, and his voice carried the weight of old nightmares. I was commanding the cruiser Death's Edge at the time, he said. We were part of the second wave, meant to clean up after the dreadnoughts broke their lines. But there were no clean battles with the humans. Every engagement was chaos. Around them, the cantina had grown completely quiet. Other patrons pretended to focus on their own drinks, but everyone was listening. Stories of the human wars were rare and valuable. Tell me about the battle, Velthon said quietly. What made it different from other conquests? Zethkar closed his eyes, remembering. The humans had a commander named Admiral Jake Morrison. He was aboard their flagship, a ship called Defiance. When we analyzed their communications, we expected typical military talk. Orders, coordinates, tactical discussions. Instead, we heard something we had never encountered before. What was it? They were saying goodbye to each other, Zethkar said. Not just the commanders, but ordinary crew members. They were telling each other about their families, their children, their hopes for the future. They knew they were going to die, and they were making peace with it. Velthon tried to understand. Why would they waste time with such talk during battle? Because they were not fighting to win, Zethkar explained. They were fighting to make us pay the highest price possible. Every human ship we destroyed took at least one of ours with it, sometimes more. The old commander leaned forward, his 3 eyes focusing intently on the young soldier. I remember the moment I realized we were in trouble. Captain Ryan Kelly was leading a squadron of 6 human fighters against our formation. His ships were tiny compared to ours, barely larger than our escape pods. But he had studied our tactics, learned our weaknesses. Zethkar paused to drink, then continued. Kelly led his squadron into an asteroid field near Mars. We followed, expecting to destroy them quickly in open space. Instead, he had prepared a trap. The humans had spent weeks placing explosives on the larger asteroids, turning the entire field into a minefield. That sounds like a defensive strategy, Velthon said. It was, Zethkar agreed. But the humans did not use it defensively. Kelly waited until our ships were deep in the field, then detonated everything at once. His own squadron was destroyed in the explosion, but he took an entire wing of our fighters with him. The young Vorthak struggled to process this information. He killed his own people? He sacrificed his own people, Zethkar corrected. There is a difference. Kelly's squadron volunteered for the mission. They knew it was suicide. They did it anyway because it would save other human lives. Velthon had studied military history extensively, but he had never heard of such tactics. The Vorthak way of war emphasized preserving one's own forces while destroying the enemy. Mutual destruction was considered a failure of leadership. The asteroid field was just the beginning, Zethkar continued. As we pushed deeper into their system, the humans showed us new horrors. They had no concept of acceptable losses. If destroying one of our ships required sacrificing 10 of theirs, they considered it a bargain. The old warrior's voice grew darker. We captured some of their damaged vessels. When our boarding parties entered, they found the human crews had destroyed all their equipment rather than let us have it. The survivors fought us with tools, with pieces of metal, with their bare hands. Surely they eventually surrendered when they saw resistance was hopeless. Zethkar made that sound again that might have been laughter. Hopeless? They never accepted that anything was hopeless. I watched human Marines led by a colonel named Maria Santos board one of our damaged cruisers, not to escape, but to plant explosives. Velthon frowned. They boarded your ship to destroy it? They boarded our ship while their own vessel was dying around them, Zethkar said. Santos led 20 Marines through the docking tube as her ship was breaking apart. They fought their way to our engine room and detonated charges that crippled us for months. The old commander paused, staring at his drink. I was on that ship. I saw Santos die. She was badly wounded, bleeding from a dozen cuts, but she kept fighting until the explosives were in place. Her last words were to her Marines, telling them to make sure the charges were set properly. What happened to her Marines? They completed the mission, Zethkar said simply. All of them died, but they completed the mission. When we finally regained control of our ship, we found they had also destroyed our communications array, our navigation computer, and our medical bay. They had turned a simple boarding action into a complete disaster for us. Velthon sat back, in his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. How could they fight so effectively? You said they had no experience with space warfare. They had no experience with our kind of space warfare, Zethkar corrected. But they understood something. We did not. They knew that wars are won not by the side with the best technology, but by the side willing to pay the highest price for victory. The old warrior gestured to the viewport, where stars twinkled in the darkness of space. We had conquered dozens of worlds because other species eventually decided that survival was more important than freedom. They would fight until the cost became too high, then surrender to save what they could. And the humans? The humans decided that freedom was more important than survival, Zethkar said. They would rather die as free beings than live as slaves. Once we understood this, we knew we were facing something completely different from anything we had encountered before. Velthon was quiet for a long moment, thinking. But surely your superior numbers and technology gave you advantages. Our technology was better, Zethkar agreed. But the humans were smarter. They studied our weapons, our tactics, our ship designs. They found weaknesses we did not know existed. The old commander's voice carried a tone of grudging respect. Admiral Morrison was a brilliant tactician. He realized that he could not defeat us in direct combat, so he changed the rules of engagement. He made every battle cost us more than we could afford to lose. How? He divided his fleet into small groups, Zethkar explained. Instead of one large battle, we faced dozens of smaller engagements. Each group had specific targets, specific goals. They would strike at our supply lines, our communication relays, our repair facilities. They made it impossible for us to consolidate our forces. Velthon nodded slowly. Hit-and-run tactics. Exactly. But with a difference. When other species used such tactics, they would retreat when things went badly. The humans would continue fighting even when their position was hopeless. They turned every tactical withdrawal into a fighting retreat that cost us dearly. Zethkar finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. By the end of the first month, we had lost 30 ships. Not destroyed completely, but damaged so badly they needed major repairs. The humans had lost twice as many vessels, but they considered it a victory. Why? Because they had learned something valuable, Zethkar said. They had learned that we could be hurt, that we could be beaten, and they had proven to themselves that they could stand against the Vorthak Empire and survive. The old warrior looked directly at Velthon. That was when Admiral Corthan made his first mistake. He decided to show the humans the true power of the Vorthak fleet. He ordered an attack on their orbital stations around Earth. What happened? Zethkar's expression grew even more grim. We learned that the humans had been preparing for that attack since the moment we arrived in their system, and we discovered that cornering a human was the most dangerous thing you could possibly do. The cantina had grown even quieter. Velthon noticed that several patrons had moved closer to their table, pretending to read datapads or check their communication devices. Everyone wanted to hear what the old commander would say next. Zethkar ordered another drink, his fourth since the conversation began. The bartender brought it quickly along with a plate of food that the commander ignored completely. The attack on Earth's orbital stations, Velthon prompted gently. Europa Station, Zethkar said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was supposed to be a simple operation, orbital bombardment followed by ground assault. We had done it hundreds of times before. No station could withstand the firepower of a Vorthak battle group. The old warrior's hands gripped his glass so tightly that Velthon worried it might break. Admiral Corthan assigned the task to General Mordak and 3 battle cruisers. The station was built into Europa, one of their planet's moons. Intelligence said it housed maybe 10,000 humans, mostly miners and researchers. It should have been destroyed in hours. But it was not. Zethkar looked up with eyes that held too much pain. The siege lasted 4 months. 4 months of hell that cost us 2 battle cruisers, 50,000 troops, and the sanity of everyone who survived. Velthon leaned forward. This was not in any of the official records he had studied. What made it so difficult, he asked. The humans had turned the entire moon into a fortress, Zethkar said, but not the kind of fortress we expected. There were no massive walls or shield generators. Instead, they had done something much worse. The old commander paused, gathering his thoughts. Europa was a mining colony. The humans had been digging tunnels through the ice for decades, extracting resources and expanding their operations. When they realized we were coming, they turned those tunnels into a maze of death. Zethkar's voice grew stronger as he continued, driven by the need to make Velthon understand. General Ben Parker commanded the station's defense. He was not a career military officer. Before the war, he had been a mining engineer. But Parker understood something about warfare that our generals did not. What was that? He understood that the defender's greatest advantage is not walls or weapons, but knowledge of the battlefield. Zethkar said. Parker knew every tunnel, every chamber, every weakness in the moon's structure. He used that knowledge to create a nightmare for our forces. The old warrior took a long drink before continuing. We began with orbital bombardment as planned. Our ships fired continuously for 6 hours, turning the moon's surface into a wasteland of craters and melted ice. We destroyed their surface installations, their communication arrays, their landing pads. General Vorthak declared the operation a success. But the humans were underground. Deep underground, Zethkar confirmed. Our bombardment had no effect on their tunnel systems. When we landed our troops, we found that the real battle was just beginning. Velthon had studied urban warfare at the academy, but fighting in tunnels was considered a specialized skill that few species had mastered. The tunnels were not just hiding places, Zethkar continued. Parker and his people had spent months preparing them for war. Every corridor was a potential trap. Every junction was a killing ground. The old commander's voice grew darker. I was part of the third wave, leading a battalion of our best troops. We had advanced weapons, powered armor, and detailed maps of the tunnel system. We thought we were prepared for anything. What happened? We entered the tunnels and found ourselves in a different kind of war, Zethkar said. The humans had removed sections of the tunnel walls, creating hidden passages. They could appear behind us, attack, and disappear before we could respond. Velthon tried to imagine fighting in such conditions. The Vorthak military emphasized open combat where their superior technology could be used effectively. But surely your weapons and armor gave you advantages in close combat. Zethkar made that bitter, laughing sound again. Our weapons were designed for ship-to-ship combat and open battlefields. In the narrow tunnels, they were too powerful. Energy blasts would melt the ice walls and collapse entire sections. We ended up trapping ourselves as often as we hurt the humans. The old warrior paused, his expression distant. The humans had no such problems. They used simple projectile weapons, explosives made from mining equipment, and tools that had been converted into weapons. Captain Amy Davis led a team of engineers who had turned the mining machinery into death traps. How? They rigged the excavation equipment to explode when we approached. They filled sections of tunnel with toxic gases from the mining process. They used the ice itself as a weapon, causing cave-ins that buried entire squads of our soldiers. Zethkar's voice grew quieter, more personal. I lost half my battalion in the first week, not to superior firepower or better tactics, but to clever traps and desperate courage. The humans fought with everything they had. When they ran out of ammunition, they used rocks. When they had no rocks, they used their bare hands. Velthon was struggling to understand. But they were miners and researchers. They had no military training. They had something better than training, Zethkar said. They had desperation, intelligence, and a complete willingness to die for their cause. Parker had convinced them that every day they held out was another day for their homeworld to prepare its defenses. The old commander's hands were shaking. Worse now, he clasped them together to stop the trembling. The worst part was the psychological warfare. The humans would call out to us in the darkness, telling us about our families, our homeworlds, our fears. They had studied our culture, learned our weaknesses. How could they know such things? They had captured some of our personnel in earlier battles, Zethkar explained. But instead of executing them or holding them as prisoners, they had talked to them, learned about us, understood us. Velthon was horrified. They tortured your people for information? No, Zethkar said, and his voice carried a strange tone. They treated our prisoners well. They gave them food, medical care, and respect. They talked to them as beings, not as enemies. And our people, grateful for the kindness, told them everything they wanted to know. The young soldier could not understand this. Why would they be kind to prisoners? Because they understood something we did not, Zethkar said. They knew that information freely given is more valuable than information taken by force. They knew that beings who are treated with respect will trust their captors more than those who are tortured. The old warrior took another drink, his eyes distant. As the siege continued, we began to realize that we were not just fighting for control of a moon. We were fighting for our sanity. Every day brought new horrors, new losses, new evidence that the humans were not like any enemy we had faced before. What finally ended the siege? Zethkar's expression grew even more grim. Lieutenant Tony Mitchell and his squad of 12 humans were trapped in the deepest part of the tunnel system. They had been fighting for 3 months, living on recycled air and emergency rations. They were surrounded by 300 of our troops. Velthon waited for the rest of the story. General Mordak offered them terms: surrender and they would be treated as prisoners of war. Their families on Earth would be spared when we conquered their world. It was a generous offer. What was their response? Mitchell sent a message to General Parker, Zethkar said. He said that he and his people had fought as long as they could, but they would not surrender. They had found the station's emergency power core and they were going to detonate it. Velthon's eyes widened. They were going to destroy the entire station. The entire moon, Zethkar corrected. The explosion would have been visible from Earth. It would have taken out our 3 battle cruisers and every soldier we had on the surface. But they would have died too. They were already dying, Zethkar said. But they chose to make their deaths meaningful. Mitchell's message to Parker was simple. Tell Earth that Europa Station held. Tell them that we never gave up. The old commander's voice broke slightly. General Mordak ordered an immediate evacuation. We had 30 minutes to get everyone off the moon before the humans detonated the core. We lost equipment, supplies, wounded soldiers, but we got out. And the humans? Mitchell and his squad died when the core exploded. But their sacrifice sent a message across the galaxy. Humans would rather destroy themselves than surrender to the Vorthak Empire. Zethkar finished his drink and sat back in his chair. After Europa Station, everything changed. We were no longer fighting to conquer a species. We were fighting to survive against an enemy that had no limits, no fear, and no concept of acceptable losses. The explosion of Europa Station had changed everything. Word spread through the Vorthak fleet faster than official communications. The humans had chosen to destroy an entire moon rather than surrender. What kind of species would do such a thing? Zethkar sat quietly for several minutes, staring at his empty glass. Around them, the cantina had grown completely silent. Even the bartender had stopped moving, listening to every word. That was when we should have left, the old commander said finally. After Europa Station, we should have returned to Vorthak space and reported that Earth was too dangerous to conquer. But Admiral Corthan had lost too much face to retreat. Velthon shifted in his chair. What happened next? The Admiral decided to change tactics, Zethkar said. Instead of direct assault, we would use psychological warfare. We would break their spirit before we broke their defenses. The old warrior gestured for another drink, his 5th of the evening. His speech was still clear, but his movements were becoming slower. We began broadcasting messages to Earth. He continued. We told them about their colonies that had fallen. We showed them footage of Europa Station's destruction. We wanted them to understand that resistance was hopeless. Did it work? Zethkar's bitter laugh filled the quiet cantina. It had exactly the opposite effect. Instead of breaking their spirit, we gave them heroes. Every human who died fighting became a symbol. Every battle became a legend. The old commander leaned forward, his 3 eyes focusing intently on Velthon. That was when we encountered Captain Nicole Hayes. Velthon had never heard the name, but the way Zethkar said it made him pay closer attention. Hayes commanded a human cruiser called Liberty's Dawn. We captured her ship during the Battle of Titan, one of their outer system conflicts. She was badly wounded, half her crew was dead, but she was still fighting when our boarding parties reached her bridge. What made her special? She should have been just another prisoner of war, Zethkar said. But Hayes had something we had never encountered before. She could make you believe in her cause even when you were her enemy. The old warrior paused, collecting his thoughts. Standard procedure was to interrogate captured officers, then transfer them to prisoner facilities. But Hayes was different. She would talk to our guards, our medical staff, anyone who would listen. Not about military secrets or battle plans, about why humans fought. Velthon frowned. What do you mean? She would tell them about her children back on Earth, about the schools they attended, the games they played, the dreams they had for the future. She would talk about human art, human music, human stories. She made us see humans as more than just an enemy species. Zethkar's voice grew softer, more personal. I was assigned to oversee her interrogation. For 6 weeks, I met with her daily. She answered our questions about human military capabilities, but she also asked questions about us, about Vorthak culture, our families, our hopes and fears. Did she gather intelligence? She gathered something more dangerous than intelligence, Zethkar said. She gathered understanding. By the end of those 6 weeks, half the guards in the facility were questioning why we were fighting this war. The old commander took a long drink before continuing. Hayes had a theory about the war. She said that the Vorthak Empire conquered other species because we believed we were superior, but humans did not believe in superiority. They believed in equality. Velthon struggled to understand. All species believe they are superior to their enemies. That is what we thought, Zethkar agreed. But Hayes showed us something different. She said that humans fought not because they thought they were better than us, but because they thought all beings deserved to be free. The old warrior's hands began shaking again. He clasped them together on the table. She started holding discussions with the guards, not escape attempts or propaganda sessions, real conversations about philosophy, about the nature of freedom, about what it meant to live as a free being versus living as a slave. What happened? 3 guards requested transfers to avoid her influence, Zethkar said. 2 others began questioning their orders, and Sergeant Vorthak, a veteran of 12 conquest campaigns, asked to speak with me privately. Velthon waited for the rest of the story. Vorthak had served the Empire for 30 years. He had never questioned a single order, never doubted the righteousness of our cause. But after 6 weeks of talking with Hayes, he asked me a simple question. What question? He asked me why we were fighting, Zethkar said. Not what our orders were, or what the strategic objectives were. He wanted to know why we were trying to enslave beings who had done nothing to harm us. The old commander's voice grew quieter. I could not answer him. For the first time in my career, I could not explain why the Vorthak Empire needed to conquer Earth. Hayes had planted a seed of doubt that grew into something much larger. Velthon felt a chill run through his scales. What did you do? I reported the situation to Admiral Corthan, Zethkar said. I recommended that Hayes be transferred to a maximum security facility where she could not influence our personnel. The Admiral agreed, but it was too late. Too late? Word of Hayes and her ideas had spread throughout the fleet, Zethkar explained. Soldiers were asking questions they had never asked before. Why were we fighting? What gave us the right to enslave other species? What would happen to our own families if someone stronger than us decided we should be slaves? The old warrior paused, his expression distant. The Admiral tried to stop the questioning by ordering more aggressive attacks on human positions. He thought that seeing their enemies fight back would remind our troops why we were there. Instead, it had the opposite effect. How? Every battle showed our soldiers more examples of human courage, Zethkar said. They saw humans sacrifice themselves to save strangers. They saw wounded humans share their medical supplies with captured Vorthak soldiers. They saw humans treat prisoners with kindness even while their own worlds burned. Velthon was trying to process this information. But surely your people understood that kindness in war is a sign of weakness. That is what we had always believed, Zethkar agreed. But the humans proved us wrong. Their kindness was not weakness. It was strength. It took incredible courage to show mercy to beings who were trying to destroy your species. The old commander's voice grew stronger, filled with remembered awe. Commander Steve Wright became legendary during this period. He led human forces in guerrilla attacks against our supply lines, but he also established field hospitals that treated wounded soldiers from both sides. His units would attack our convoys in the morning, then send medical supplies to our wounded in the evening. That makes no sense, Velthon said. Why help enemies you were trying to kill? Because Wright understood something we did not, Zethkar said. He knew that the war would end eventually. When it did, Both species would have to live with what they had done. He wanted to make sure that when peace came, it would be based on respect rather than hatred. The old warrior looked directly at Velthon. Wright's tactics were copied by human commanders throughout their space. They would fight us fiercely during battle, but treat our wounded and dead with dignity afterward. They would destroy our military equipment but leave medical supplies and food for survivors. Zethkar paused, his expression thoughtful. This created a problem for our commanders. How do you maintain hatred for an enemy who shows you kindness? How do you justify enslaving beings who risk their lives to save yours? What was the result? Defections, Zethkar said simply. For the first time in Vorthak history, soldiers began deserting not because they were cowards, but because they no longer believed in the cause they were fighting for. The old commander's voice grew grim. Admiral Korthon declared that any soldier who questioned the war would be executed for treason. He established special units to monitor loyalty and report suspicious conversations. The fleet became as afraid of its own leadership as it was of the humans. Did that solve the problem? It made the problem worse, Zethkar said. Fear and doubt are like poison in a military organization. They spread until they corrupt everything. By the time we realized what was happening, entire ships were refusing orders. Velthon was horrified. Ships refused orders? The cruiser, Honor of Victory, was ordered to bombard a human civilian colony, Zethkar said. Captain Jerthon refused, saying that attacking non-combatants was dishonorable. When Admiral Korthon threatened to have him shot, Jerthon's crew supported their captain. The old warrior finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. That was when we realized that we were no longer fighting the humans. We were fighting ourselves. The war had changed from a conquest into a civil war within our own fleet. What did the Admiral do? Zethkar's expression grew even more grim. He decided to end the rebellion by showing everyone what happened to those who defied the Empire. He ordered the Honor of Victory destroyed by our own ships. And the crew followed that order? Some did, Zethkar said. Others refused. The fleet began to tear itself apart while the humans watched from a safe distance. They did not even need to attack us anymore. We were destroying ourselves. The old commander looked up at Velthon with tired eyes. That was when Admiral Karen Brooks launched her famous counterattack. The cantina was completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped pretending to work and was openly listening to Zethkar's story. The old commander sat hunched over his empty glass, gathering strength for the final part of his tale. Velthon waited patiently. He could see that these memories were the most painful of all for the old warrior. The Siege of Hell, Zethkar said finally. That was what Admiral Karen Brooks called her counterattack. She waited until our fleet was weakened by internal fighting, then struck at the heart of our forces. The old commander's voice was barely above a whisper now, forcing everyone to lean closer. Brooks was different from the other human commanders we had faced. Morrison was brilliant, Wright was compassionate, Hayes was inspiring. But Brooks was something else entirely. She was patient, calculating, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. Velthon had never heard of Admiral Brooks, but he could tell, from Zethkar's tone, that she had left a deep impression. While our fleet was tearing itself apart, Brooks had been preparing, the old warrior continued. She had studied every battle, every engagement, every tactical decision we had made. She knew our weaknesses better than we did. What was her plan? To show us that humans could hunt as well as they could be hunted, Zethkar said. Brooks took the entire remaining human fleet and launched deep strikes into Vorthak space. Not random attacks, but carefully planned operations designed to cause maximum psychological damage. The old commander paused, his hands shaking worse than before. I was transferred to the defense of our supply depot at Kepler Station when Brooks launched her first attack. We thought we were safe. The station was 3 systems away from the front lines, protected by orbital platforms and a garrison of 50,000 troops. What happened? Brooks arrived with 12 ships, Zethkar said. Just 12 ships against our entire defensive network. We should have destroyed them easily. Instead, she showed us what humans had learned about warfare during the months we had been fighting them. Velthon waited for the explanation. The humans did not attack our defenses directly, Zethkar continued. Instead, they targeted our support systems. They destroyed our communication relays, our supply ships, our medical facilities. Within hours, we were cut off from the rest of the fleet. But you still had superior numbers. Numbers mean nothing when you cannot coordinate, Zethkar said. Brooks had divided our forces, isolated our commanders, and created chaos throughout the system. Then she began hunting us, one group at a time. The old warrior's voice grew darker. Captain Danny Foster led the boarding operations. His teams would attack our ships, capture our supplies, and disappear before we could respond. They moved through our formations like ghosts, striking without warning and vanishing into space. Zethkar looked up at Velthon with haunted eyes. For 3 days we hunted them. For 3 days they hunted us. The difference was that we were afraid and they were not. Fear makes you make mistakes. Confidence makes you deadly. How did it end? Brooks sent us a message, Zethkar said. She told us that we had a choice. We could continue fighting and be destroyed piece by piece, or we could surrender and be treated with the same respect that humans showed all prisoners. Velthon was shocked. The humans offered surrender terms. They offered us something no Vorthak commander had ever offered a defeated enemy, Zethkar said. They offered us dignity. Brooks said that any soldier who laid down his weapons would be fed, given medical care, and eventually returned to Vorthak space when the war ended. The old commander's voice carried a tone of amazement even after all these years. Half our forces surrendered immediately. The other half fought on, but their hearts were not in it. How do you fight beings who offer you mercy when you have shown them none? What about the final battle at Earth? Zethkar closed his eyes as if the memory was too painful to face. Admiral Corthan was desperate. The war had gone on for 3 years. Half our fleet was destroyed, the other half was in rebellion. The Vorthak High Command was demanding results. So the Admiral gathered every remaining ship and launched one final assault on Earth itself. The old warrior opened his eyes and stared into the distance. We came with everything we had left. Over 1,000 ships, including the super dreadnought Empire's Wrath. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in Vorthak history. Surely no force in the galaxy could stand against such power. But the humans were ready? The humans had been ready since the day we first entered their system, Zethkar said. 3 years of war had changed them from a peaceful species into the most efficient military force the galaxy had ever seen. The old commander's voice grew stronger, filled with remembered terror and awe. Admiral Chris Johnson commanded their orbital defenses. Chief Engineer Rachel Adams had turned the entire planet into a fortress. Every moon, every asteroid, every piece of space debris had been converted into a weapon platform. Velthon tried to imagine such preparations. They militarized their entire system? They militarized their entire civilization, Zethkar corrected. Every human, from military commanders to school children, had a role in the defense. President Angela White had united them in a way we had never seen before. The old warrior paused, gathering strength for the most difficult part of his story. The battle lasted 6 days. For 6 days we threw everything we had at their defenses. For 6 days, they threw it back at us with interest. Our superweapons, our advanced technology, our superior numbers, nothing worked. What made the difference? The same thing that had made the difference in every battle, Zethkar said. The humans were fighting for something they believed in. We were fighting because we had been ordered to fight. There is a universe of difference between those two things. The old commander's voice broke slightly. On the 6th day, Admiral Corthan ordered the Empire's Wrath to ram Earth itself. He said that if we could not conquer the planet, we would destroy it completely. That was when I realized we had become the monsters in this war. Velthon sat forward. What did you do? I refused the order, Zethkar said simply. I was the ship's second in command. When I refused, half the bridge crew supported me. We arrested the admiral and surrendered the ship to the humans. The cantina was completely silent now. Even the Yazar background hum of the station's life support system seemed muted. What happened next? President White came aboard our ship personally, Zethkar said. Not to gloat over our defeat, but to offer us something no one had ever offered the Vorthak Empire before. What was that? Partnership, Zethkar said. She said that the war was over, but the future did not have to be built on hatred. She offered to help us rebuild our fleet, our government, our entire civilization. Velthon could not believe what he was hearing. They helped you after you tried to enslave them? They did more than help us, Zethkar said. They taught us what it meant to be truly civilized. The humans showed us that strength comes not from the ability to conquer others, but from the ability to forgive them. The old warrior looked directly at Velthon. That is why I shake when I see human ships, he said. Not because I'm afraid of their weapons or their tactics. I shake because I remember what it felt like to discover that everything I believed about strength and power and civilization was wrong. Zethkar stood up slowly, his forearms supporting his weight against the table. The humans patrol the galaxy, now as peacekeepers, he said. They enforce a simple rule. No species may enslave another. They have made the galaxy a place where beings can be free. The old commander looked out the viewport at the stars beyond. Every species in the galaxy owes them a debt that can never be repaid. They saved us not just from destruction, but from ourselves. They showed us that there was a better way to live. Velthon sat in stunned silence as Zethkar walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the weight of the story he had just heard. Outside the viewport, a human patrol ship glided past, its hull bearing the symbol of Earth. In the cantina, dozens of beings from different species raised their glasses in a silent toast to the ship and its crew. They all knew what the old commander knew. The humans had not conquered the galaxy through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had conquered it through something far more powerful and far more terrifying. They had conquered it through the simple, revolutionary idea that all beings deserved to be free.